Hello, welcome to the Long Road Podcast. The journey goes ever on with the long road. This episode, the piano ain't got no wrong notes. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to play the piano and some of the influences along the way. This podcast from the Long Road is about our music as a band, our writing, our stories, our anecdotes, interesting people we meet along the way, and who knows what else. My name is Chris Lydon, and I seem to be hosting the thing. So this is episode 4. Huge thanks to everyone who's listened to the first 3 episodes. They're all up on SoundCloud and iTunes to listen to. So if you're starting off here at episode 4, by all means head back through to the earlier episodes as well. Episode 1 was a chat with Steve Bonham, the chief instigator of The Long Road, about his travels and his new book, A Beautiful Broken Dream. Episode 2 was with Kev Moore, bass player and songwriter with The Long Road. He was talking about American music influences and picking out some of the examples of songs that he's written or co-written for the new albums. Episode 3 was John Humphreys, talking about all things banjo, playing some snippets from the new albums, which highlight the banjo, the sort of classic American instrument. So it was almost inevitable that episode 4 was going to fall to me. There were 4 of us in the Long Road, and I'm the last one. So I'm going to be talking about piano playing, some of my influences along the way, some of the tracks on the albums that are really up there for me. They're really my favourite bits from the albums. So if you enjoy listening to the snippets of the songs that I put in this, remember that the 2 albums, The Girl with the Rattlesnake Heart and Reliance, are both available from vagabondphilosopher.com. You can buy them as digital downloads or as limited edition vinyls. So for now, I am going to hand over to, well, myself. Enjoy. The piano ain't got no wrong notes. That was Thelonious Monk who said that. He's a jazz pianist and composer, quietly and perhaps not so quietly, subversive in his progression of the genre in terms of piano playing and jazz composing. And he said that in response to some, guest expert who said he, Monk, created extraordinary music in spite of playing the wrong notes on the piano. And Monk's response is just perfect to me. The piano ain't got no wrong notes. I feel like it's true, but to be fair, only a master craftsman could claim it, really. So a bit about me. I started playing piano when I was little. I think I must have been around about 6 years old. I've got vague recollections of finding an old notebook, little thing with a red cover from my teacher, which had the date, something, some day, some month, .90 in it. So it must have been around about 6. My dad played the piano brilliantly, and all my older siblings, bar one, were playing the piano too. So there was generally a sense of playing the piano is a good thing around the house, and I'd like to think I was super keen, but only up to a point. I can't really exactly remember what point it was, but certainly I became an utter menace about my dogged desire to no longer have piano lessons. Have you ever tried putting if you've got to take a cat to the vet and you've got to put them in their cat basket? Well, I was literally like that, all 4 limbs pushed against the car door frames so that they couldn't force me in there to go to piano lessons. Anyway, long story short, eventually when I was a young teenager, I think, my parents acquiesced and I stopped having piano lessons. But at that point, the magic for me happened. I was suddenly allowed to play the piano because I wanted to play it, not because I had to practice or because I had a great exam or whatever else to prepare for. I could play because I wanted to play. When I was around 13 or 14, I think, I'd watched my older brother play piano in the school show production of Joseph, and I was playing tuba in the band. There was actually a tuba part. And I thought that was pretty neat, but it was, that piano part was pretty prescribed. You had to play the notes that were on the page, essentially. And then next year the school was doing a production of Grease, and the music teacher asked me if I would play the piano. And looking back, I think it's a bit of a watershed moment for me, really. Grease, it's a 1970s musical set in 1950s America, the rock and roll era, and and suddenly I was allowed, even expected, to make it up. I had a flip through the piano part that arrived at school, and there were barely any notes in it. I mean, just loads of slashes and chords and suggestions of things. And how exciting, I thought. I mean, looking back now, I can see why it resonated so much with me. Not being told what to do, having some freedom, but still being able to contribute to that bigger picture and making that better than the sum of its parts. Now, that, the older me now sees the appeal of that. If you've ever seen the musical Grease, it's great fun on stage and on film. Even the 10 or 15 year time gap between it being actually written in the early 70s and the year it was set in the late 50s, the sort of became a gentle pastiche to some of the music. I think a sterilisation of some of the murkier rock and roll fringes. Reading up on it, apparently, in the very first less music-y version of Grease, it was more of a play than a musical. There was much more swearing, but that got stripped out as things progressed. Musical horizons had started to broaden dramatically between the sort of classic 50s rock and roll and then the 70s rock and roll and other popular music that had merged out of the sort of wildness of the 60s. So for me, the freedom of being given a chord symbol to play from rather than a set of notes. Luckily, by that point, I was quick enough to translate the chord symbol to something real at my fingers. Sometimes there would have been a bass line written out and the occasional fix, we like this particular figure here, please. And you end up building up a bunch of tricks as to what you can do with that. And being allowed or even enabled to solo, you've got to learn, you've got to know when to kick off and when to ease back. It was a world apart from the Mozart or the Beethoven or whoever it was that was looming over me in those early years of piano lessons. And as well as rock and roll, I started to get more into jazz more widely. I spent my weekends as a teenager off and about with school jazz band and my own little jazz band that me and my friends set up. I think the appeal was the freedom, we could make the music our own. Around the same time, so it would have been around the year 2000, I quite literally found myself on stage with Steve Bonham and our old friend Tim Gadsby at a mini festival evening celebrating the summer solstice and the new millennium in our home village. And I had been volunteered to play rock and roll, or whatever else we'd call it, folk, country, whatever else it was, with Steve and Tim. And I don't think we'd had a rehearsal before the day. I think I just turned up in the afternoon and we got started. I don't think I'd ever been sent a song list. It was sort of a bit of a trial by fire, really. But the easygoing attitude from Steve and particularly Tim, laid back, he was horizontal. And my approach back then was rather, sod it, what's the worst that can happen? But to be honest, it still is. But we just got on with things. I was very lucky if we knew what key we're going to be in. Eventually I had to learn to go around the curveballs that either Steve or Tim would throw me. Hey, this one's in F, or hey, he means it's in D, when in reality it was probably in G. But that's neither here nor there. For many years, me and Steve and Tim had a bunch of fun playing rock and roll, blues, whatever we liked really, making it our own. None of us were we were never sticklers for reproducing the recorded version. We'd find chord sheets perhaps, but essentially we wanted to put our mark on it. Over time, it led us to recording and releasing some albums with that band we called Dr. Big Love, which are actually still out there on Spotify today if you're so inclined. We still do get listens from around the world. It's astonishing, really. Skip forward 10 years or so, and Steve and I are back making music together again. We sort of went back to Steve's old folk roots from the 80s, but we were writing some new material as well. And then John Humphreys joined us. Originally fiddle and squeeze box and things, but again eventually moved to more sort of guitar-y, dobro-y kind of things, banjo. He accidentally said he played the banjo, and as soon as you've got a banjo in the neighbourhood, your sound world just changes. And without really realising it, Steve and I had started to find ourselves back in that sort of jazzy, bluesy world of American music. It had always been there, but we just needed some time to find it and sort of scratch at that itch a bit, I guess. Kev joined us and kick-started more songwriting, and the world that the Long Road now inhabits is pretty fully fledged, I guess. I play piano and tuba on the Long Road tracks, sometimes both at the same time, thanks to the magic of multi-track recordings. I've yet to attempt to play piano and tuba at physically the same time, but you never know. As a pianist, give me a story, give me a landscape, give me a vision to create. I'm a happy man. Give me the chords as well if you can. By all means, write it out. Tell me if it's in F or D. I mean, it's probably really in G, but that doesn't really matter. We'll get to the bottom of it soon enough. I can't remember who said this, but I'd agree with this quote. The piano keys are black and white, but they sound like a million colours in your mind. Now, Steve and me have written songs together for about 15 years or so, I guess, and so many are born out of me just idly twiddling away at something between songs at rehearsal or in some downtime at the studio. It's amazing to create something from nothing. Out of nowhere, a song can sometimes just sort of happen. There are loads of great pianists and musicians over the years who have influenced me. A lot of them probably stemming from the jazz world for sure. Duke Ellington, Fats Waller, Oscar Peterson, Herbie Hancock, Thelonious Monk, who apparently was once described as the elephant on the keyboard, which I quite like. And I didn't find this out until today, but Thelonious Monk's middle name was Sphere, which I think is amazing. Who else? Ella Fitzgerald, Nina Simone, Ray Charles, Count Basie, Henry Mancini, in particular the Peter Gunn soundtrack, which actually had John Williams of Star Wars fame playing piano on it. More modern era, Dudley Moore or Norah Jones, Diana Krall. There was an album by Diana Krall that I for some work I did years ago, I ended up listening to it over and over again. Jules Holland, two of the big names for me. One has been around for a long time, and one has only really entered my consciousness in the last few years, but they're linked. One influenced the other. So there's this chap called Professor Longhair, known as Fess, and if you Google him, he's just such an influence on so many sort of jazz, blues, New Orleans musicians and pianists in the 20th century. Somebody said about New Orleans that it was such a unique gumbo, and Fess soaked up all the stuff around him and poured it back out again. His piano playing was gutsy and bold and human, but you could find a lightness of touch when needed. Somebody said, I can't find this today, a beautiful mind as well as rough and ready, and I quite like that. Moments of beauty, but also able to kick it when you need to. And loads of piano players in the mid-20th century onwards would claim to sometimes play a la Fess. So that leads me to the second person. One such person who would claim some a la Fessness is Dr. John, with his trademark hat, obviously. Despite being known for having some funny influences, voodoo ceremonies or medicine shows or whatever, in interviews he always seems to come across as quite a sober, quite quiet person. But he's the same as Fess, really, a melting pot of styles and influences that then become his own. His biggest hit, you probably don't hear a note of him playing piano on it, Right Place, Wrong Time. It's much more about the guitars and the funky brass than wild piano playing. In fact, he said he always wanted to be a guitarist. It's fun stuff, but it's a 70s melting pot through and through. I think Dr. John, he made it onto a Disney soundtrack a few years ago, The Princess and the Frog, I think it was. A new song written by Randy Newman, Down in New Orleans. And it's good fun, it's a New Orleans-y style of piano playing, for sure. But it feels a bit sort of Dr. John sanitized to get past the Disney censors, though. Most of Dr. John's piano playing, there's a sort of a wildness to it and a sticking up of two fingers at what is expected of you as a pianist. And that chimes with me. I've said it a few times already. Make it your own. There's loads of stuff on YouTube, Dr. John, so go and search out, Google Dr. John, check out Professor Longhair as well, Fess. There's so much stuff out there, and both of them have got a fizz and a humanity about their playing, which is just astonishing. And I think most artists would say they stand on the shoulders of giants. Dr. John definitely says that Fess is one of the giants that he stands on the shoulders of. Both of them are from New Orleans. someone once described that place as the most delicious musical gumbo. And that's where I'm coming from piano-wise, and I'm lucky that in the long road I get to play piano and tuba and make the stuff of my own, our own. Now for me, the long road stuff has sort of a few features that are common to many of the songs. There's an earthy richness with the guitars and banjos. It's always got some heart with the lyrics. It's telling a story. There's resonant and fertile with many voices layered up together. An expansive painting of the landscapes. The music evokes hopefully times and places gone by, or times and places that are yearning to be found again, or at the very least not forgotten about. So I've picked out a few of the highlights of my favourite bits from the new albums. The two albums are The Girl with Rattlesnake Heart and Reliance. And this stuff really has got some heart and soul in it. It's crafted with time and care, and channeling and condensing so many of all of our influences from me, Steve, John and Kev into the 22 songs over the two albums. The eagle-eyed of you who've watched the Girl with a Rattlesnake Heart music video on YouTube, you might have noticed I don't necessarily do a huge amount on the piano in that one. It's just my left hand that does anything in that one. But I think we made the right decision in the studio. We kept it simple. The whole song, I think, sounds bigger, more expansive with these long, low notes. They open out the sort of landscape horizons of the songs and hopefully paints a picture in your mind. Putting some chords in the middle or high up would have made it seem smaller. Now, Stuart Jones at Woodwarm Studios, where we were recording all this stuff, he just about read my mind when he did whatever the heck he did in the break in the last verse. Some clever reverse piano, something or other. It really gives it a fizz, and it's what I had in my head, and he made it real. So thanks, that one, Stuart. So this is The Girl with the Rattlesnake Heart.
I won't say nothing, I will lock it away. Keep on hiding it till my judgment day. Lying in her arms, you know it's the start. Giving things over to the girl with a rattlesnake heart. You got a rattlesnake heart. You know I'm a liar, but I got something that you might.
Now the next one is a song co-written by me and Steve. It's called One I Loved Before. And it started with just nice sort of simple piano chords, setting the landscape for the words to sit on top of, and the one of the things I love the most, the colour, the resonator part, the dobro part that John puts on, it just absolutely transports you to this world we're trying to create. And actually in the studio, Kev and I had a veritable ball with Stuart, the engineer, recording the layers of vocals for the chorus. It's so much fun.
And the sickle and the skinning knife covered up with rust, but you're not the one who knew me when I ran across the fields of green. You're not the one who read my mind as we drank down that fist machine, but you're the one who sleeps with me as the wind blows around my door. Always be with you, but you're not the one I loved before. Looking
Do It Again. I love this recording this one, and good on the boys for encouraging me to try some different things on this one. I'm not going to put a sample here, but dig it out, look it up if you fancy something a little bit wild. Next up, it's Wayfaring Stranger. Love the sound world we created on this one. Just a big up to Stuart for his. Well, there was a moment in the studio that, guys, I've got an idea. Bear with me. And an idea of what you could do with the piano sound to give it this sort of huge, ethereal, wispy, sort of floating sound along the top. I just love it. And coupled that with the vocal effect, it's just great. So this song, it's a traditional song. We've done version of it, but it's got all those Long Road features, rich layers of voices, the landscape is taking you to time and places. It's a great one for me.
I'm going there to see my mother. Said she'd meet me when I'd come. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
Oh, a quick mention for Sally here. Sally in Blue Flames is... I just love the song. It's a great song, and I love playing the piano on it. It just falls so nicely under the fingers, as long as we do it in A. If we ever did it in B flat, I'd be done for. One of the things I love is the tension and release of the part that chugs along for a few bars quite intensely, then releases the listener back to calmer waters. It's hard to describe in words, so I'll just play the sample.
She won't talk of me no more. But sometimes in the night when she turns out the light, I hope she can recall in the days before the fall, when she took me dancing through the rhythm of that long and lonesome night. Rhythm of the lonesome night. Oh Sally, dreams are growing.
Well, I thought I'd just pick up a few of the songs, but I seem to be talking about every single one here. There's some I just can't not talk about. Another favourite for me is Maybe I'm Just a Man, the most sort of brazenly jazzy one on the albums. This quite literally started out with me idly fumbling away at some chords on the piano in the studio, and Steve's eyes light up and he points at the piano and says, that, keep that, we can do something with that. I think, unless I'm misremembering, Stuart went out for literally an hour, and when he'd come back, we'd virtually had the song in shape and the melody done, and to most the final song isn't much more complicated than that. It's just piano, bass, and vocals in the final version, I think, and I think it's really neat.
Well, bless my soul. So there you are. You're looking good. Did you travel far? You ain't got long. Well, no, I understand. I took off east along the beaten trail, chased some gold, I was bound to fail. Let it slip away, those grains of time, just like sand. As the day slips in to that neon eve.
A glancing mention for No Particular Blues. I love this quirky number. I got to channel some sort of Muppetsy, cartoony piano playing. Nothing outrageous by any means, just sort of subtly subversive perhaps, which, if any of you know the Lydon family, it's just about precisely how we like things to be. I love that one. Speaking of subversive, cartoony piano playing, if you want a good chuckle, by all means, seek out the opening of You Never Can Tell. The whole song, if you like. The opening makes me just snigger thinking about it. You know something good is coming along if it has that kind of opening. And when we do it live, I say good luck to Steve, who has to sing all those words at the breakneck pace that we play this one at. The last song I'll talk about, it's probably the most significant from the Long Road's point of view. It's called A Beautiful Broken Dream. I think this was a big turning point in the project for us. Steve had idly said in the studio one day, how about we do a song that's a bit like song X or about song Y? I mean, right now, I can't for the life of me remember what those two songs were, song X and song Y. But I had listening. I got one sort of key feature from each of them. One key feature was the sort of 12/8 Trixie feel to the whole song. I can't remember what the other feature was, but there was definitely another one that we absorbed. And not long after that, we had the start of Beautiful Broken Dream, and Steve went away with it for a few days and wrote the lyrics, and we sort of zoomed out and we could see that this whole gone to look for America projects starting to sort of emerge. Thinking about it, this must have been around the time that Steve was going to do his trek through America. Perhaps I'm misremembering, but I think it was. And we could see how the book and the songs we were writing were all sort of fitting together into a bigger jigsaw. About this song in particular, originally we thought it was going to be much bigger, like huge drums and percussions and this anthemic chorus, sort of loads and loads of voices. But actually when we worked on it, we realised it needed to be more simple. It needed more just soul to it. And we stripped things back and we kept it simple at the core, storytelling. And we're pretty damn pleased with the result. Again, for me, it sums up the Long Road sound for me. This expansive, spacious, with lyrics at the heart of it and layers of voices. So this is a little snippet from A Beautiful Broken Dream.
You can tear my heart out, but why take all the rest? Hear my people crying for a beautiful broken dream, slipping and sliding along the mountain stream, the forest and the backwoods, and the dancing in the dark. Hear my people crying for a beautiful broken dream.
Now, I've been rambling on forever, so I'm going to stop soon, but final mention must be made to two significant piano players from my childhood, without whom it's very likely I wouldn't be where I am today, and I just wouldn't be the pianist I am today. They were shining lights for me back when I was a child, and they continue to be so now in adulthood. So from The Muppet Show, Rolf, and Dr. Teeth from The Electric Mayhem, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to leave you with this final thought, attributed to Tom Waits, I think, for those of you who have heard me play live over the years, especially back in our home village. The piano has been drinking, not me. Well, that's it for this week's episode of the Long Road Podcast. You've probably had quite enough of listening to me for one podcast. Episode 5 will be released in 2 weeks' time, on Friday the 9th of November 2018. As I record this, episode 4, Steve is currently out in the wilds of New Mexico on his latest adventure. He sends me the occasional update and audio snippet, and put some pictures up on Facebook. The topic of the next podcast will be Adventures in Golden Dust, stories from Steve's New Mexico travels. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Hopefully you'll find us there. You can check out past episodes from The Long Road on vagabondphilosopher.com. Follow us on Twitter. Steve is on SteveBonham01. I'm on Das Chris Lydon. Kev is on More Music, and John's not on Twitter yet. Find Steve Bonham on Facebook to connect with us there, and you can see our videos and other bits and bobs. You can listen to full tracks from the albums on Spotify, and you can buy the complete albums, The Girl with a Rattlesnake Heart and Reliance, and Steve's new book, A Beautiful Broken Dream, at vagabondphilosopher.com. Remember, if you buy the book, you get a code that gets you 10 free track downloads as well, so you can build your own album. And you get to give your friend a code that gives them 10 free tracks to download as well, so you can spread the love. Thanks once again for listening, and the journey with the Long Road continues in a couple of weeks. Bye for now.